the hendecasyllable is, well, that is indeed the most popular meter for Catullus' short poems, and that and the Olympia iambic are his sort of favourite means, apart from the elegiac couplet, of course, of getting over his humorous or sort of deeply felt amatory ideas. So hendecasyllables, they can be serious, certainly. I mean, they can be passionate. They do tend to be short, because it's one of those meters that has fairly few variations, and the fewer variations that are possible, the more repetitive it gets, the longer the poem is. So there's a reason why Catullus uses these things for short poems. And of course, Renaissance poets to show off. It's obviously possible to write hundreds of lines of hendecasyllables in one go, but it does get a bit wearisome. Hendecasyllable obviously means 11 syllables, and there's a fairly fixed structure to it. Again, I tend to memorize these things by memorizing a line or two of the relevant authors. So the line I usually remember actually is from the Sparrow poem. So, Sparrow, delight of my girl. Passer de lice I, ne I, li. And that is a pretty fixed metrical structure. You notice I haven't marked any footlines on it. People do differ on this. Personally, I don't find it helpful to talk about feet when we're thinking about lyric poetry, because feet implies choice of feet, like dactyl or spondy. So, of course, it's absolutely essential to be thinking in terms of feet when we're looking at hexameter poetry. But when we get on to lyric, it is possible to cut it up into feet, but it's no help to us because we're not actually changing these feet around at all. So, I mean, if you want to analyse this in feet, okay, you'd say that's a spondy if you like, that's a dactyl, that's a trochee, that's another trochee, that's a trochee or spondy at the end, fine. But it hasn't actually got us anywhere in terms of thinking about how to write it. So I much prefer to think of these lyric poems just as a set metrical scheme that almost always stays the same. The only variation you can have in hendecasyllables is either the first or the second, but most definitely not both, can very occasionally be a short. If you observe Catullus' practice, he does it sometimes, but it's just a convenience from time to time, but not done that often, so you may as well not think about that very much. And I think if you want to write hendecasyllables from a fairly pure starting point, I wouldn't really bother with those variations unless you absolutely have to. If you've got short syllables you want to use, stick them in somewhere later in the line. It's a nice meter. I mean, it's got a good rhythm to it. I mean, there ought to be a pause. Obviously, there's always got to be a pause in the middle of a line somewhere, and almost always Catullus chooses that pausing point, but not always. So if one runs through, again, the best way to get familiar with some of these meters, if you want to, is to take a poem, say Catullus for this particular meter, and make sure you've scanned it correctly and you do understand its rhythm, and then read it aloud and see how he is doing it. Yeah. But of course, if you do have two shorts together in the line, there is only one place for it. So I mean, this is actually, normally we're hunting desperately for dactyls, aren't we? Or at least we want our dactyls for the fifth foot of the hexameter or the end of the pentameter. Here, a dactyl can be a problem because there's only one place for it, and yeah, you've got to save it for that place. So I think that's why such words end up there. I mean, if we take another of these lines. Again, the opening line of poem 5 of Catullus. Viva mus mea lesbi at quamamus. You see, actually, he's quite loose in what he's doing in this line. He's got two elisions. He doesn't have a single word for those four syllables of the choriamb, RJ was just mentioning. So, Deilicii is a single, quite impressive four-syllable word, but he's not doing it in that line, is he? Viva mus mea lesbi at quamamus. And actually, well, what he's doing about caesuras is a bit vague in that line too, isn't it? I mean, yes, there's a word break there. There's a sort of break there, but of course he's got an elision over it. So We don't have the same rigidity about the caesura as we do in hexameter verse. That's obviously a perfectly good line, and indeed a very famous one. So we're a bit freer in that sense. But of course, in general, we must have pauses in the middle of the verse. I mean, having one enormous word occupying the whole lot would be a bit ugly, I think. Vivamus mea lesbiat quamemus, rumor res questionum severiorum, omnes unius aestimemus assis, soles occideret redire possunt, nobis cum simuloccidit brevis lux, nox est perpetuum adormienda. Feel the rhythm of the hendecasyllable coming out. I think it's a very nice meter, and of course it is quite restricted. And as we're now getting into lyric poetry, quite restricted meters are the order of the day, and we have to use extra flexibility in what we're trying to say in order to deal with the rigidity of the form we've chosen. So if you want to say something where the words you want to use don't fit into these meters very easily, then don't, is my advice, because it's going to get too complicated. You've got to be flexible about what you're saying and fit the words in their sensible places. On the other hand, of course, in lyric, you can use, perfectly easily, words with one short between two longs. I mean, there are plenty of places where they'll go, so in that sense you have the flexibility to use different vocabulary that is not going to fit in the dactylic meters.